support to me as a staff member, and I appreciate that. And you'll want to come to the reception at 2 o'clock this afternoon. There's cake, so you won't want to miss it. As well as there's all kinds of wonderful pictures that we have found that we put up along the walls of all the exciting events that happened over the years during her time of ministry here. Musicals, pageants, all kinds of exciting events. So you'll want to come as we celebrate and remember her wonderful ministry here at First Baptist Church. A couple weeks ago, I pulled out one of my old movies that I watch every once in a while called Rocky. How many of you have seen Rocky? Okay. You know, great boxing movie. You know, they just go at it. It's a great story about someone who is washed up, who ends up making good at the end. But if you remember, the fight scenes are pretty brutal, aren't they? I mean, you know, you hear the noise, you see the sweat fly, the blood fly. And I was starting to think, you know, that's a little bit like some marriages I've seen when they're fighting. It's a fight to the death. And no one's going to give in. And finally the 15th round bell rings, and you know only one person is going to win at the end. That was never the intention of God's plan for marriage. When it gets to be that brutal, that drawn out, then it's time to reevaluate how you deal with conflict in a relationship. So what I want to talk about today is how to fight fair in marriage. I mean, even in boxing, there are rules, right? You know, there's certain punches you can't do, there's certain things you can't do, and there are certain things we need to do and not do in marriages to have successful fights. Now you may say, hold it, Russ. Should we even be fighting in marriage? Well, let me tell you, conflict is inevitable because you have two different people, two different personalities, two different genders. And naturally, as you work together in life, there's going to be some conflict. There is no such thing as a conflict-free marriage. You may have one that dominates the other, but there's conflict going on, whether it's outward or not. You know, they say there are three types of rings in a marriage. Okay, there's the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and suffering. And I think that can be true sometimes. But what we can do with the conflict we have, the fighting that goes on, is do it in such a way that the conflict is successfully managed and we spiritually grow through it and our marriage grows and God is glorified. So let me share with you some scriptures and how we can fight fair and have successful conflict in our marriages. First of all, we see that we need to understand and accept your mate. It says in Romans 15:7, accept one another then, just as Christ has accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. Now that verse is for all Christians, not just people who are married, but especially for people who are married. If you're Christians, you need to accept one another in such a way that praise is brought to God, because guess what? God puts up with you, doesn't he? Now think about that. Think about some of the stuff you pulled this week spiritually. And God still loves you. So how can we not accept things from one another? Now a good example of this is our personalities. Now we all have a style of personality, our temperament, our quirks, the way we think, our weaknesses. No one is perfect. And each personality is different from others. And you may not realize when you got married that this person that you married had a certain type of personality. Because so often we're in love and we don't really see that real person because we're just so in love it blinds us, doesn't it? And then one day you wake up after you're married and you go, wow, this person has these quirks, these idiosyncrasies, these weaknesses, this is the way they think, this is their temperament. I don't know if I like that too much. And sometimes the very quirks and temperament issues that you fell in love with starts making you crazy later on. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, what God wants you to do according to Scripture is accept it. That's who they are. Accept it, grow to like it. Also, family background. Now, you may be aware of this, maybe you aren't. especially if you're not married yet, but when you marry that woman or that man, you're marrying the whole family. It's a package deal. Sometimes that package is a gift. Sometimes it's a booby prize. But the fact is, you get the whole package when you marry that person. And when you get to know that person, you'll see that often the way they think, the way they react is a product of their growing up experience. If you have the opportunity to get to know the family for a period of time as you date your future mate, I would encourage you to get to know that family, because seeing that family will help you understand the way the person you marry thinks. But there's another issue, and that's gender differences. In case anyone hasn't noticed yet, men and women are different. There was a book that came out a while back called Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars. Now, I've not read the book, but I think that's a pretty accurate description of how generally men and women are different. Now, this is a general term. There are some women that are exceptions, there are some men that are exceptions. But generally, men and women are wired differently. Example, generally, men are more black and white logical thinkers. Not that women are illogical, I'm not saying that, but men first and foremost think in a logical way. Example, sometimes Susan will come home from work. I'll ask her how her day was. She'll tell me about the conflicts and the issues that may or may not have happened that day. You know what I want to do? I want to fix it. So I start giving her advice. Okay, honey, this is what you need to do. You need to do this, you need to do this. I wouldn't put up with that. I would not tolerate it. And she goes, will you listen to me? I just want you to listen and care. People who are logical thinkers, which men generally are, want to solve the problem. Women want to solve the problem too, but they come about it differently. Now, women are what we call intuitive feelers, generally. This is a general truth. That is, women have that ability to pick up on vibes. You know, they'll be in a relationship and they'll pick up on the little telltale signs just that someone emanates to know whether they're doing bad or good. A man will say, how you doing? I'm fine, good. And you just trust him for that. A woman will say, how you doing? Fine. And they'll pick up on the vibes on how that fine is being said to understand there's something going on. And they will want to relate and talk about it more. Men don't relate too well. We will go fishing and hunting instead, okay? Women want to hang out and talk it out. So there's some of the differences. And women are very logical. Men can be intuitive, but generally we're talking about the way that we tend to lean when we're thinking and reacting. Also remember this. You ready for it? This may be the most important thing I say all day. Who you marry is who you get. They generally don't change much as time goes on. Now, they can change some. Occasionally there's some kind of crisis that occurs in someone's life that changes them in a drastic way. But overall, who you marry is going to be who they are 40 years from now and 50 years from now. I know that's depressing for some of you, but it's true nonetheless. Do not marry someone thinking, well, I love most of them, but I'll fix the other stuff. The person that's least effective in fixing another person is the husband or the wife. I'm just telling you. Nagging does not work. Having a better plan for their life does not work. We're talking about generally what you see is what you get. Now, that does not mean that you accept the sin areas in their life. If you're a wife and your husband cheats on you all the time, he can't just say, that's just who I am, you have to accept me. No, we're not talking about that. Major sin areas, a wife or a husband can hope, pray, and expect that person to change in time. But generally, the personality, what they like and don't like, their temperament, all of that is pretty much set when you get married. And hopefully, if they have a good relationship with God, they will grow spiritually, where the negatives get smaller and the positives get bigger. But you can't make that happen. That's God that does the work, and that person being open to it. We need to understand that what you see is what you get, and we have to accept that. So not only do we understand and accept our mate, we also need to do something else, and that's what I call work on your plank eye. Let's read Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 5. says, Jesus said, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye." You see, whenever there's conflict going on, we can see the specks in our spouse's eyes, but we don't always see the planks in our own eyes. You see, marital strife usually involves contributions from both parties. Now, one may be contributing more to the other to cause the conflict, and the contributions may not be equal, but each person shares a burden. You're not very often totally innocent in a fight. And plank eye is that contribution that you bring to the fight, the way you think, what you've done, that you are blind to yourself. It's amazing how you can be harsh on your mate without seeing what you've done to contribute to the problem. What you have done to her or to him that's helped cause the problem. Sometimes the planks in our eye are unreasonable expectations. Have you ever gotten onto your spouse about something that they had no idea was a big deal to begin with, as one of your secret agendas? Have you ever gotten angry because you'd had a bad day and your spouse made the mistake of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, and you're on top of them yelling? When you need to realize the plank is the problem, not the speck. Guess what? The plank was your own attitude to begin with. We need to understand that often our judgments, when we're evaluating these situations, are non-objective. They're emotional. You bring your own issues into conflict. And so often we're blind to it. Now here's the problem. Often your spouse, even if they see your contributions to the problem, are not the best person to talk about it, because you'll react, right? So what you need to do is to be honest with yourself, allow God to speak to you, and maybe use friends, family, and other counseling to help you see the planks in your own eye, because often you're blind to it, folks. Sometimes those planks come from baggage we're dragging into our lives from our childhood or previous relationships. And we don't even realize that baggage is causing us to be blind to how we're reacting to our current relationships. With God's help, we need to evaluate our part in the problem. And then you need to go to your mate and humbly take ownership to what you have done in the problem. And above all, folks, don't be spiritually superior to your spouse, even if you think you are. There's nothing any worse than walking in and wanting to straighten out your spouse, and so you're going to quote some scriptures and be holier than thou. Maybe you are more spiritual. I'm not saying you aren't. But that doesn't play well, folks. Spiritual pride always accentuates conflict in a relationship. And by the way, you might be generally more spiritual than your spouse. That doesn't mean you aren't in sin at that particular moment. That does not mean you don't have planks in your eye over certain issues yourself. Don't pull the spiritual card. It simply causes problems. But there's more we can do. Not only do we need to work on our plank eye, we need to speak the truth in love. Okay, let's say that together. Speak the truth in love. One more time. Speak the truth in love. Now, if you can't speak the truth in love, it's probably best you don't speak it at all. It tells us in Ephesians 4:15, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. It says in James 1:19, my dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Let's take a look at those scriptures. First of all, it says to speak the truth. Here's the problem. Often what we see is not the real truth. Over the last few years, we've seen our political discourse degenerate in Washington, D.C. And depending on what news channel you watch, you're going to hear a completely different perspective on what's going on. And they're opposite from the other sometimes. Well, both can't be right. The truth that we perceive is not the real truth of the situation. It's our perspective, our emotions, our opinions that we see as truth, but they aren't. What is truth? It is the reality as God sees it. Let me repeat that. It's reality as God sees it. If it's reality as God sees it, one of the best ways we can try to find out the truth is go to God. We do that looking at the scriptures and through prayer and sometimes through spiritual counsel. Determine that real truth, not your distorted perception, and no absolutes. Okay, don't say you always do this, you always do that, because first of all, it's almost never true. And it poisons the situation. We need to speak honestly. But if we're speaking honestly, remember that we need to say, this is my opinion, not this is the reality. And don't exaggerate the problem. Control your emotions. When we're angry and we overreact, as I have many times, that's not the truth. It's only the truth if it's reality handled in a proportional way. If you explode and blow up, what you might have been saying might have been true, but you've overdone it, and it's no longer true the way you express it. And seek God's help above all in seeing the truth through that prayer, Bible study, and spiritual counsel I talk about. Also, folks, keep to the issue. In my marriage counseling over the years, it's always amazing how they'll come in with one set of problems, but before you know it, one or the other dig out all the other problems they've had in the past. Don't counterpunch with past stuff. I remember one marriage counseling session in another church where the husband had made some mistakes. The wife was very upset, understandable. And he was talking to his perspective. She said, oh yeah? Well, 13 years ago you did this. Wow, what a memory. And it wasn't a huge thing, okay? It was a minor thing in my mind that he had done 13 years ago. He had already forgotten about it. He had asked forgiveness at that moment. He said, I asked forgiveness from you back then. She goes, I know, but I hadn't forgotten it. Well, that completely poisoned the situation. The original problems were now to the side as we dealt with stuff 13 years ago. When we speak the truth, we need to keep to the issue and forgive and forget the past as best we can. But remember what it says, speak the truth in love. Respect one another. Keep it positive. Keep it tactful. Keep it under control. No dirty tactics, okay? Such as sarcasm or contempt for the other person. Don't be rolling up your eyes when he's sharing with you or she's sharing with you the situation. And remember to ask this key question. Listen carefully here. Does the truth need to be brought up at all? I find that 80% of the conflict I see among people never had to happen to begin with because it wasn't that big of a deal. We simply gin it up to make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. My wife and I don't fight or argue near as much as we did when we were younger. Why? Because both of us have realized that most of the stuff ain't worth it. We just let it go. Our happiness and our relationship is more important than minor little issues that we can blow up into major magnitude. 80% of what you want to fight about probably doesn't need to be brought up. You just need to accept that that person made a mistake or that's the way they are and let it go. Focus on the positive in that person rather than the negative. Then lastly, really listen and try to understand what they're saying. Remember what it says in James there. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. One person said you got 2 ears but only one mouth. You should be listening twice as much as you talk. That's kind of tough for me, being a talker. But what it is saying is you don't just hear what they're saying, you're truly trying to understand. It doesn't say quick to hear, it says quick to listen. We need to be actively trying to understand where they're coming from. Rather than thinking ahead, saying, okay, this is how am I going to respond. You ever done that? They're busy talking, you're already trying to think your response to what they're saying, rather than trying to listen and understand what they say. Try to understand and above all control your anger. God's put you together. You're stuck with each other for the rest of your lives. It doesn't help to make it worse, does it? I don't know about you, but I'd rather be happy than angry. How many would rather be angry than happy? How many would rather be depressed than joyful? Well then, if you want to be joyful, you want to be happy, then you need to not fight most of the fights. But when you do, speak the truth in love, quick to listen and slow to speak. Also, we need to realize that we need to be willing to fight to resolve and reconcile, not to win. Now, I'm going to tell you something you may not realize. You're both on the same side. You're not enemies. And though conflict is inevitable, combat is optional. A good example is when one family or one couple just got married. They came back from honeymoon, first morning back. They wake up and the husband tells the wife, honey, why don't you go brew some coffee? She said, no, I don't think so. That's your job. He said, why is it my job? She said, well, God says so. What do you mean God said it was my job to make the coffee? She goes, it's in the Bible. There's a whole book, Hebrews. He's smart. He got up and he made the coffee. If you're trying to win the argument, you're already wrong, folks. You're already wrong. And you may win. You may decisively beat your spouse down verbally. But you've lost. The purpose is to reconcile and to resolve the problem using justice and fairness. Those are the goals. How can we work this out together? And compromise is often the key. Pride is the enemy of compromise. Sometimes we won't give an inch. And why? Because we know we're right. Well, so what? Let's say you are right. At least in your eyes. Can't you give a little? Isn't that what love's all about? And the timing needs to be right. What you don't want to do is fight when you're both tired, right before you go to bed. You're both emotional, or one of you are, or distracted, or you've got 5 minutes to solve the issue. That's not the time. You need to have the disagreements and the conflict resolution, which is a process, happen during the times that you have time. And by the way, no ambushes. We've all had it happen to us. Maybe we've done it ourselves. We walk in and, ah! Woo! And then they have to leave. And all you're doing is sitting there shaking and damaged. And there was no resolution. You just got ambushed. They feel better for about 5 minutes. But there's that poison that builds up over time in a relationship. Also, listen carefully as someone who's done counseling for 35 years. Please don't keep lists of what the other person's done wrong. Instead, keep a list of everything they've done right. I'm amazed at how people will bring up stuff that happened 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Like it happened yesterday. They're never going to let it go. They may say they've forgiven, but they haven't forgotten and they really haven't forgiven. Let it go. Every day is a new start. When I was a high school teacher, when I'd have a real problem student, I would hammer it. But you know what? The next day they had a new start. I had a rule, and that is I will not bring past stuff back into the classroom. Everyone gets a new start, folks. And if that's true for high school students who are teenagers, how much more should it be true for that person that you married and you love? Let it go. And folks, also successful resolution means often allowing your partner to save face. If you've humiliated them, if you've beaten them down, no matter how right you think you are wrong. But there's more. And that is, folks, sometimes you can't resolve the problem. You ever notice that? No matter how hard you try, the woman's still in Venus, the man's still on Mars. It isn't going to happen. So what do you do in those situations? You have to realize sometimes you have to agree to disagree and accept irreconcilable differences. There's going to be some things you can't solve. And you're going to have to learn to disagree, especially on the minor issues, and go on. One of the first big fights my wife and I had was in our apartment. I went to go get a glass of water. I opened up the left cabinet where it's supposed to be, and it wasn't there. And she had it on the right side of the sink. Amen. The right cabinet. Right. What's that all about? And so I was angry. I mean, when I opened up the right cabinet, I want it to be right there, which is the left. Everybody knows that water glasses are on the left side of the sink. No. And so we got into it. And after a while, we finally calmed down to figure out why we felt so strongly. And my wife said, you know, when my mom put the glasses in the cabinet, it was on the right side. Well, yeah, well, my mom put them on the left side. You know why? My mom's left-handed, and Susan's mom was right-handed. It was a minor thing. I don't know how we resolved it, how we resolved that one.
Now we're on the left.
Yeah, but it depends on the house. It depends on the house, you know. It's just not, is that worth fighting over? It seemed like it at the time. It was an irreconcilable difference. We had to agree to disagree. And frankly, I think depending on the house is where the glasses go. You must learn to do that. And above all, ask yourself a question. Right now, all of you who are married, and how you handle conflict does it glorify God? Is ultimately resolution occurring? Is ultimately the person that you had disagreement with feeling good about it, you're feeling good about it? Have you been willing to compromise? Has it been handled without a lot of emotion? Is God glorified on how you handle your conflict? And then lastly this, folks. Some of you, a few of you, hopefully not many, will have bigger struggles than others. Conflict is happening all the time. And then that is when you need to have the courage to check a sick marriage into the hospital. Okay? If your marriage is that sick, you need to check into the hospital. Now, I'm not saying you go to the emergency room at Texas County and say, hey, my marriage is sick. What we're talking about is going to get extra spiritual help. Sometimes counseling is necessary. Your feelings, your emotions, all the damage being done is so much you can't handle it yourself. Don't be afraid to go and get help. Use God's resources. I'm available. But honestly, sometimes marriages are so sick, I can't handle it. So I go ahead and recommend them to someone who's a specialist in trying to help sick marriages. Don't let pride keep you from getting the help you need in your marriage. And men, here's the problem I see the most often. Women are willing to go get counseling and help, men won't. They want to handle it themselves. Folks, if you need the help, you need the help. And don't wait until it's too late. I've had more than one marriage where they came by to see if they can get it fixed on the way to the attorney to get the divorce. If you think you have cancer, you don't wait 6 months to a year to get it checked out and get help. Do you want to get it done early? The same is true with a sick marriage. Jesus wants you to have a great marriage. He talks about it. God has put you together. You may wonder why sometimes, but He has. And it's time to have the great marriage that God wants you to have. And one of the key aspects of that is to deal with the conflict that is inevitable. Conflict is not sin. It's only sinful based on how you handle it. Are you ready to get help if you need it? Are you ready to start working on making your conflict more productive, where you can grow spiritually from it, grow closer together, and have the kind of marriage that God wants you to have? Let's all stand as God speaks to us today.